Roll for Crit is made possible thanks to the support of viewers like you and our patrons on our Patreon page.
You can become a patron for just $1 a month at patreon.com/rollforcrit.
The Alien franchise is a favorite here at Roll for Crit, and one of our favorite companies a long time ago announced that they got the rights to make a game. We have been waiting quite some time for it, and finally, after this wait, we are proud to be able to review from Gale Force 9 Aliens, Another Glorious Day in the Core. This is a cooperative survival game, which has many different modes, but usually involve you controlling Marines and maybe some civilians that you may recognize, and trying to fend off the horrible creatures that are the Xenomorphs.
That's right. Each player will have their own Marine with their own unique abilities. Some of those abilities may trigger at the start or end of your turn, or may just be passive bonuses that you have. You'll also start out with some weapons and equipment that you can choose from, depending on what suits your character and or your play style. And on your turn, you will have two actions that you can take. They can be two different ones or two of the same. First, you can move. That's going to be a pretty common one. You can move up to your speed, a number of spaces up to your speed around the board. You can also go diagonally, but of course, you can't go through terrain or walls, and you also can't go through aliens. If you happen to run into one of them, you're going to have to stop and try to take it out. That's one of the other biggest actions that you're going to be able to take on your turn is attacking. You choose one of those weapons, target an alien that is within your line of sight, and you get to roll a die to see if you can hit it. Each player has an aim dial, and that will be set to a certain number at the start of their turn, depending on the character's stats, and that determines how well they're going to be able to hit a target. So you'll be rolling a d10 when aiming with a weapon, and you need to get a number equal to or lower than your aim value. And each time you attack, that aim dial is going to be lowered by 1. So if you want to attack again, it's going to be a little bit harder to hit. But again, it will reset at the start of your next turn, so it just depends on how all out you want to go. To use most weapons, you're also going to have to exhaust some cards by putting them into the exhaust pile. We'll get to exactly what that means in a little bit. So if you manage to hit an alien, you kill them, they're removed from the board. There may be aliens that have tokens underneath that represents a whole swarm of aliens, so depending on how many are in that group, they will still only take up one space, but of course there can be multiple groups. If you want your aim to be a little higher, you can also take an action to raise it up by 1 point. There are barricades that you can build as an action too. There are doors on certain maps, and if you're next to one, you will make a tech roll. Each player has a tech stat, and if you succeed, you barricade that door, and that will hopefully prevent some aliens from breaking through later on. You'll also have some cards that have actions on them if they're in play that you can use, or you can interact with certain objects in the environment. For example, if there's a computer nearby, you can use that to try to get a look at aliens that are out of range from you. This brings us to the rest action, which also comes back to that exhaust pile I mentioned earlier. You lose the game, no matter which scenario you are playing, generally speaking, if the main deck and the exhaust pile both run out. So in this game, there is a main deck, an endurance card deck, an exhaust pile, and a discard pile, and those are three separate things, and as you are playing cards, they will be transferring between these piles. Now, you can take a rest action to recycle cards, and those cards could come from your hand or from the exhaust pile, and by doing this, you'll be putting those cards back onto the bottom of the main deck. Eventually that deck will be reshuffled and you will be able to draw things from it anew, but you want to make sure that you're doing that and not spending too many cards in the meantime, because again, if both those piles are empty, it's a loss.
Now, Jonathan made it sound like you have tons of tools at your disposal, but trust me, there are plenty of things that are going to be thrown your way that you're not going to be happy to deal with. First of all, that endurance deck, while there are a lot of great cards in there, such as events or weapons or even some armor, there are also some threats. These cards, when drawn or revealed, have to be played. And yes, they're all negative, and some of them may cause the game to end much sooner than you realized. So you'll have to be careful about those cards, and usually they cannot be discarded, meaning that they're going to keep coming back for you to deal with. The other big thing, obviously, are the Xenomorphs. After everyone takes their turns, the Xenomorphs get their own phase. They will move 6 to the closest character and try to attack them. Now, you will get a chance if they get near someone to countershoot them if your aim is high enough and you are willing to make that attack and exhaust some cards. You'll then roll a die and compare it to the character's defense value. If it is greater than the character's defense, that means the character is hit and it is knocked down. If the total sum is 10 or higher, you may actually just straight up die. In addition, if they're already starting next to another alien, when the alien it triggers and someone's knocked down, they're going to actually capture that character. And if you're playing through the campaign mode, you're going to have to do a rescue mission in order to save them before they get infected and become more aliens. Now, if you've seen the alien movies, though, you know you don't always see them coming, and those will be represented by blips. These will usually be how they spawn onto the board, and they won't move a full 6. You actually roll a special d6 die, the alien die, and that's how many they will move. Now, once they become in line of sight of a Marine, you're going to flip it over, and it's going to tell you how many aliens spawn there. So usually a figure and a couple tokens put underneath it. That's when the Xenomorph shows its full strength of the swarm and will continue its movement and try to attack you. Finally, we're going to need to add some more Xenomorphs to the board. You're going to have each player draw a card from the motion tracker deck. There are easy, medium, and hard depending on the number of dots on there. As you can guess, some ones are maybe spawn a little less and a little less punishing if you do or do not see them. Some of them may add tunnels, which pretty much are more spawn points. After each player has resolved their motion tracker card and all aliens are on the board, you're going to check if victory or loss conditions have occurred, and then clean up and start a new turn phase. You're going to keep doing this until either A, you completed the objectives for whatever your scenario or bug hunt is, or B, you have lost because everyone died or you have exhausted all your cards. Either way, it is going to be a gun fest of trying to kill as many of those Xenomorph bugs as you can while trying to make sure at least one of you survive.
Yeah, hopefully at least one can make it out if you work together, cooperate, and use teamwork. It's like you said, this has been a long time coming. We got to play an early version of this that was not finished at a convention a couple years ago now, and now we finally got our hands on the final product, strictly the base game we're reviewing today, as there are already 2 expansions that add extra characters and figures and scenarios and things like that. Those are available, but we just played with the base stuff. And like you said, big fan of Aliens, big fan of Gale Force 9 and their games that have come out. So this seemed like a really great, seems like a home run, this game coming out of the gate. And it is, for people, if you haven't played it and you're maybe not sure what the vibe of it is, I would say essentially it boils down to a dungeon crawler. That's sort of a game, something like a Gloomhaven or a Descent, simplified from those, I would say, and certainly not as much of a focus on a campaign style, but that sort of gameplay, you're going around corners, you're measuring line of sight, you're shooting monsters that come up, and you're trying to complete whatever objective they give to you. The base has, I think it's 6 total campaign missions, but you may not do all of them depending on what happens.
Yeah, it's 3 main story missions as well as a side mission for supplying, as well as 1 for rescuing.
Okay.
In addition to that, there are 4 bug hunt missions. By the way, you can play the story one standalone. It's just for the campaign. You go through those in a particular order, as you can probably guess, based on the Aliens movie story. If I actually had to give this, I don't think dungeon crawl, I mean, it is still moving around dungeon crawl, but I think the best way I would describe this is wave clear. I know the expansions add stuff, but in the base alone, it really is just all the aliens are the same, and you're just finding out how do you deal with when 3 swarms of 3 come your way. Do you wait till them to get closer so you can get a grenade in? Is it better for you to get a few shots off so you can try to lower their count so they can't get as big of a hit on you? It really feels like it's not really managing different kinds of enemies, just the numbers themselves.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It has kind of that like wave shooter horde mode feel to some of the modes, or sometimes like if you're just trying to complete an objective, they can be just more like the obstacles, and it's like, how do you weigh how many do we have to kill versus what should we prioritize over killing them and with who? And yeah, that's one of the big things it's a kind of tricky, and it's hard for me to really criticize them too much for this because they are basing this on source material. And in Aliens, all the aliens are the same until you move on to other movies. They all act the same way other than the Queen, who is not in this base game.
Right. Oh, well, that's I feel like it's funny you mentioned how they're the same, except this was the movie that introduced the Queen,
Right,
which is a pretty big deal. And I also find it interesting because I also like how if you look at the Alien movie projection, and probably almost any horror movie that has lots of sequels, the first one is definitely horror, absolutely. But as they go on, and definitely in this one, it's got more of that action vibe.
Yeah, oh yeah. This is an action movie for sure.
And the game, I feel like, sort of captures it. I do think a lot of the abilities and weapons can be really good and strong, and there's some cool combos and stuff you can go on. But with those threat cards, as well as like some of those motion tracker cards can be very brutal depending when they show up. Mm-hmm. I'm not getting the feeling of like when I level up in something like Gloomhaven or something.
Right. No, it certainly doesn't have that kind of focus. There is one of the expansions actually adds some sort of experience to your characters if you do play through the campaign, but I think even that is still not like a huge focus. It's not like a major component of it. And yeah, it's definitely action heavy. You're going in, you're shooting things, that's really what it's all about. And that's what I was saying too, is like I said, like it's true to the movie. So on one hand, one of the things I do think is a little underwhelming about it for me is after a while, there's not really much of a surprise about turning a corner and seeing those blips because I know what those blips are. It's either one alien or maybe it's two or three aliens. Like
it's not like when you find it's a cat or something.
Right. It's an alien, and so you kind of get that. You kind of get into a groove after a while. I really like the aim system that we talked about, where you have this little dial and it gets harder to shoot, and you can with certain weapons, like there's some that have the what do they call it?
Full auto. Yeah, I was gonna say some of you'd be like, why? Well, you only have two actions. Why would two attacks really matter with your aim? Well, full auto pretty much is every successful attack you get to re-attack for free.
Yeah,
so you just keep shooting and shooting. But if you've played any shooter video game, anything that tends to go full auto has a terrible recoil. So you start shaking, and you might miss.
Yeah, and that's really cool. I think that's cool, and it does a great job replicating kind of that feeling I get from the movie when they're just like, unloading a clip down a hallway or whatever.
Yeah, every horror, whenever they have a gun like that in a horror movie, they just you spray and pray. You just hope to God you hit something.
Right. And it feels a little better because sure you're rolling a die each time, but it's like you feel like you're putting that risk on yourself. You understand what's at stake. You know your odds. So I think that's a really cool mechanic. And alongside that, the exhaust deck, I think also does a good job building up the suspense, goes right hand in hand with that, where you can keep shooting and shooting, but you are going to be burning cards by doing that. And you have to make sure people are resting. And we should say, too, that if you are playing with smaller player counts, some players will be able to control grunts, which are basically like NPCs. They don't have hands, or they're not as powerful as other players, but you basically get extra people to do your actions to manage everything going on the board.
Yeah, you're pretty much going to have a full squad of 6 people, regardless of number of actual players on the board, which is very helpful considering this is a wave-based game, because you're gonna need those extra hands shooting.
Yeah, I think my biggest issue with this game overall is, and again, I know this is not a perfect comparison, but in my head, comparing it to stuff like Descent or even like Mansions of Madness, and any kind of game where that's like scenario based, where you have figures moving around a map and there's a lot of combat. I feel like so often in those, you will run into, they'll have a generic, as this game does, an interact action. And each mission will say, this time you interact with this new object and it triggers something else in this room. In this game, there are 2 main things you interact with: computers, which let you look at blips, and crates, which let you draw cards or take cards from the deck, depends on which scenario you're doing. Mm-hmm. But neither of those to me were that exciting, and it seemed like the scenarios, they follow the movie roughly, but there wasn't anything too creative in my opinion, and a lot of the gameplay really boils down to just, I move, I shoot. Maybe sometimes I move twice or I shoot twice. And for me, because the enemies are pretty repetitive, that got repetitive before too long, and I ended up feeling a lot of the time was a little bit tedious to me.
I feel like the problem for me is, well, and once again, this is like you said, it's hard when I'm happy they followed the movie, generally close, but I also look at Firefly, and yes, it has expansions too, but I think in that base game, they had a lot of different weird scenarios of different ways to play. It caused different strategies. You find different things. And there are different ways to deal with it. Once again, we're going to look at Firefly like a political or different code words. If you had something in this, it never felt like, and it's good for a wave-based shooter. Just have the aliens, your basic human-based xenomorph. But I could have imagined like if they went the same distance, it could have been like there's a rhino one, there's a this, and not even the queen's in the base who's from the movie. It feels like it. Like what we've seen from their other games, they could have maybe taken a little bit more liberty with the Alien property.
Yeah, and that some of that may come down to licensing and what they
Mhm.
were or weren't allowed to include in the game. And yeah, I wish there was just, if not, I think you could do fine with just the one type of alien because that is kind of what you expect. But I wish there
Right.
was more stuff off the beaten path, like I said, with maybe some kind of loot, like anything, any reason to go down a hallway to find something that isn't either to kill an alien or to beat the objective. Just like something to look for that's kind of feels like a reward.
You will get that a little bit more in the bug hunts because, like I said, you're gonna go for those crates to get
you're looking
better
for
gear.
weapons, yeah.
But once again, that's if you enjoyed the kind of style, which I guess a lot of wave games has of you, like I feel like Left 4 Dead kind of, where it's just sort of constant hordes that you just try to keep gearing yourself up and see how far. A lot of this game will come down to scoring too. That's really what this game comes down to. It's not really, I think, as much experiencing the movie as much as just how well can I make it through these hordes. Crits and misses for Aliens, another glorious day in the core.
Crits. The game strikes a great balance between action and survival, giving you powerful cards to work with against the aliens, but always keeping the threat of more spawning in the distance or the exhaust deck and main deck running out as a suspenseful element.
The Aliens movie is equal to one of the best horror movies around, with it being a bit more of an action movie than a horror survivor. I feel like this game does a great job in keeping with that spirit of balancing the horror and action at the same time.
The aim dial mechanic makes it harder to hit your target each time you attack, giving risk and consequence to your decisions and replicating that feeling of unloading a bunch of bullets on some xenomorphs running down a hallway.
The aim mechanic combined with the full auto perk on some weapons really does a great job of capturing the recoil you'll see in many guns like this, as well as that fear of trying to unload your entire clip, hoping to hit at least most things in your path.
If you're the type of player who enjoys going after a high score, you'll have plenty of options here. Between the campaign and the standalone bug hunt scenarios, you will be encouraged to replay missions and scenarios in order to see how well you can do.
The wave-based system is perfect for those who want to hunt for that high score, and the campaign is designed very well that it's still short enough to see that replayability and get high scores, but also get that feeling that depending on what happened from scenario to scenario, things carry over and your choices mattered. Misses. You're probably going to find this get a little repetitive after a few scenarios. There aren't a variety of enemies that will change up your strategies for you to deal with, and usually you know that what you want to do, there's no surprises or twists, it's move, spot, and shoot.
Different campaign missions have different objectives that replicate some of the events from the movie, but ultimately it really all just boils down to moving and shooting. And as stated, for us, it got repetitive quickly.
We had a few issues with some of the components. For me, a big deal was with the card quality, considering you actually will be shuffling a lot. They aren't the greatest, and I highly suggest you sleeve them right away. And another big issue a lot of people have been having are the minis, not because they are in themselves bad, but they do come unassembled. You'll have to build them yourselves, which, while they do come with a lot of cool custom parts for the aliens, it does mean it's going to be an hour or two of gluing them together.
Nowhere on the box is it indicated that you will have to put these minis together, that you'll need to get any glue or separate supplies to do so. So, for more hardcore gamers who are used to that kind of thing, it might not be a big deal. But for casual players who are just looking to get into an Aliens game, they might be disappointed at the amount of time and effort they have to put in to really get the full experience out of this.
We feel like there are some pieces that are missing from the story of the movie that really could have been included to help spice up things in the original box. I know a lot of these are included in expansions, but I feel at least some things should have been considered base game materials.
Having an Aliens game and not including iconic concepts like the power loader or the android bishop or the queen herself is definitely a bummer, especially when you consider that those expansions are available on release day right alongside it. It feels like it might have been nice for them to include those things, maybe at a little bit of an extra cost, but it would have felt like a more complete experience.
So I can be happy that of all of the different properties that I love, Aliens and Xenomorphs are not one that are strange to the board game tabletop area. There are a bunch of different companies, each one with their own games, and because of that, we can sort of see side by side which ones do ones well and which ones not as well. And for the most part, this one is, I think it captures what it's trying to go for, in particular if you have those expansions in a very great way. If you like the wave-based shooter system, it actually is pretty fun because the aliens aren't anything, you don't have to like look up if they do something weird or if your guns are something like this one will only deal damage to this. It's nope, look at your aim value, roll the die, you kill it. And that really allows for players to just know what others can and cannot do. And I do feel there was the perfect amount of strategizing you want to see in a cooperative game. You know, because event cards can be play out of turn and different player abilities and stuff. Someone's like, yeah, I should be able to clear the two waves. That way you could run through to get it to that point or something. It wasn't as obviously seen in some cooperative games where it's too easy and someone can just quarterback it, or when it's too hard and everyone's just like, what can you do? I don't know what I can do.
And I agree with what you said. You know, it does encourage that level of conversation and discussion about what you should be doing and where. Unfortunately, I feel like the characters do have their own special abilities that differentiate them, but even though they have slightly different stats too, like their speed and stuff like that, and their aim levels, maybe players will feel differently who've played it. But to me, they still roughly just felt like at the end of the day, you're going to be getting a weapon and shooting it the same way as everybody else. So unfortunately I didn't get what I would have wanted that would, I think, take that to the next level, which is okay, I'm the guy who really handles, like, if there's multiple aliens standing together, I'm going over there. Or, if there's like a blips, I can handle blips or something like that in a different way.
I mean, you were playing the character who's very good with the smart gun, and because of that, you were able to clear like waves of enemies on your own.
Right,
know?
but I never felt like no one else could do what I'm doing.
Right.
You know?
You weren't the cleric.
Right.
You weren't the healer there.
And
everyone just feels like a fighter who's specced into a different tree.
Which is kind of fair, because I mean that's sort of what the Marines are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so again, it's hard because I don't know what they were restricted to in terms of characters and abilities and things, but that combined with, like I said, to me it just ended up feeling like after a while, I just didn't really want to shoot any more aliens. It wasn't that fun to me. And overall, I was pretty disappointed with this game, especially because we've been anticipating it for so long. I am eager to try out some of the stuff from the expansions, because some of those things really do sound like they would enhance the game. But unfortunately, with just the core, for me, it was, there's nothing like broken about it. It works as a game. The minis look cool if you like aliens.
Yeah.
I think you'll get something out of it, but ultimately not something that I am super excited to play again.
No, the minis, I do want to sort of just focus on that really quick, because I know for online, a lot of people aren't talking about it. I have pretty much no experience building minis. I have plenty of miniatures games, but they all came pre-assembled. So, it took a little bit of while, and relatively speaking, I made some terrible cuts, so to speak, from the plastic. In fact, Newt, I accidentally cut off her peg foot. It was one of the only times you have a slot, and I accidentally broke that. But I could super glue her. And the aliens, the fact they come in different poses, like I feel like I actually look like I have a cool miniatures army, but I don't know how many people are buying this expecting that and wanting that.
Yeah.
So it's a very I feel bad because it's like, it's a great idea. I just don't know if those people are looking for this, or someone who isn't is going to be like, well, what do I do with all these pieces of plastic?
I mean, if it was me, I don't have glue. Actually, I do have some glue, kind of, but but normally, like you said, I've never done this before. I would look at those minis and say, this is strange because, no other hobbyist like board game of this style that's not like a miniatures, like a collectible miniatures game. They don't do this. They don't require, and it doesn't say on the box requires glue or whatever. So it's a very strange thing, and I wonder if, this game is clearly, I think, from behind the scenes had kind of a troubled history of, I think it's a lot of it's to do with licensing stuff and when they could release it, and I wonder how much of our issues, especially regarding those minis, is some weird thing that happened behind the scenes, because it just seems like a very weird decision to me to do that. You can pay an exorbitant amount of money on their store online to get pre-assembled minis if you're interested.
You can, but I mean, like I said, I have little to no experience. As long as you got a really nice pair of like clippers or something and some super glue and a few hours of your time, but also spending a few hours of time before you actually get to play a game does tend to turn off a lot of people. Yeah, with fair reason.
But regardless, that it's out there. It's finally there. It is around, and it's Aliens: Another Glorious Day in the Core. And maybe
that's all it is.
That's all it is. Maybe you feel differently than we do, and you could talk to us in the comments what you like or don't like about this game, and if you've played those expansions, especially how you feel they add to it, or if you're a minis person, what you think about that whole aspect of it. Lots of discussion points we would like to hear from you in the comments section.
Absolutely, and how does this compare to all the other Alien games that are out there and available? Does this stack up against the rest, or is it going to fall prey to the Xenomorphs? Let us know in those comments down below. Till then, I'm Will.
I'm Jonathan.
And this has been Roll for Crit.
If you want to help out, you can check out our Patreon, or a simple click to like and subscribe can go a long way.
We really appreciate everything that you can do for us. We love you.